Hello, everyone. I'm Diana Kapp, and I'm the co-host of Oh, the Places You'll Work. And we're excited. This is our inaugural episode.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jelani Foster. I'm also the co-host today with Diana. We're super excited for you guys to be tuning in with us today. We're going to be talking with Jessica and learning a little bit more about her and her work.
Hi, Jessica. I'm thrilled.
Hi, everybody.
I'm thrilled to have as our first guest on the show an old friend. Jessica and I have known each other since she was 17 years old, in the throes of deciding where to go to college. She grew up in San Francisco. She wrote for the Lowell High School paper and then edited the feature section of the Middlebury College paper, where she bravely did a piece on cheating at Middlebury. And she was able to parlay that into her first piece for the New York Times when she was still a college student. Next, she got the dream summer job as a production assistant on NPR's All Things Considered. And in 2018, The Daily, New York Times' new podcast at the time, lured her away. Those were the show's very early days, and really it was the beginning of the podcast era. Now Jessica is a senior producer on the show. Welcome, Jessica. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you, guys. I'm so excited to be with you guys in the inaugural episode.
Well, thank you for tuning in with us today. Just to start off, I'm going to do some rapid fire Q&As just to get an insight of who you are as a person. So these are just short responses in these rapid fire questions. So we're going to start off with, what are you surprisingly good at?
Swimming.
Nice. Surprisingly bad at?
I think like customer service calls.
I get that. And insecurity?
That I'm not like good enough, or like I never feel prepared enough for things.
Got it. One thing that's on your bucket list?
To go to Japan.
Nice. A bad habit?
A bad habit. Oh, that's like hard. I like never think about this. I think probably when I finally getting to something on my to-do list, and then when I do it, I want to get it done so fast that I don't do it thoroughly enough.
Got it. Last one. If you could have any job on this earth, what would it be?
I think working for the New York Times, so I'm pretty much in it. Yeah. So I feel like I'm living my dream job. Yeah. That's
awesome. Thank you for answering those rapid fire questions. And now we're going to go more into the nitty gritty, longer response questions. So first off, I'm going to ask, can you tell us a little bit about your background of growing up, like your environment? What kind of family were you growing up in, your area, things like that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in San Francisco for most of my life. I grew up in the south, like eastern quadrant of San Francisco, and before moving to like a more like to the western part of San Francisco. So where I grew up was like mostly Asians, mostly Black and Latino. And then when my parents basically got off the waiting list for Section 8 housing, like we moved to like a neighborhood that was more well-to-do, and it was mostly like Asian and white. So it was like just like a very different exposure between like what I grew up with in elementary school and middle school versus high school. And that was a very different environment when I came to like Middlebury College. But yeah, so my mom still works at the airport. She's been working the same job since I was 5 years old, working in like the supplies department at the San Francisco airport. And she works for the catering company. So all the lunches and dinners and like food and drink that end up on the planes. Like she basically like puts supplies into the aircraft. And then my dad owned like a very small printing business in Chinatown, serving like Chinatown like restaurants and printing menus and like greeting cards and stuff, but he no longer does that. So yeah, and at home it was, no one really talked about politics, no one really talked about social issues. Like my parents, I've never seen my parents like read the newspaper. So we were just kind of very much in survival mode. But I think like growing up, I was very curious about the world and I really wanted to engage in those issues. And I thought like the best way to like gain access to the world and have a very different life was to like engage in like journalism, which is how I kind of like came to working for the student paper in high school.
Wow, I really love your story already. It's very relatable, and we get an inside look of like where you came from and what you've grown to this day. The second question is, did you always know you wanted to be a journalist, and what appealed to you about it that made you want to go towards this work?
Yes, I feel like I've always kind of known since like I was maybe 16, 15 years old. But I got the idea that I wanted to be a journalist in the show Gilmore Girls, and that the main character wanted to be a journalist. And I was like, oh, I want to be just like her. And like through that, I kind of watched, like I didn't have any journalists around me, but through the TV, I had access to a character who like brought me into their high school newspaper. And then that character went to Yale and then did stories for the Yale Daily News. And then the show ends with her covering the Obama campaign trail. And anyway, I got exposure to like what's like inside a newsroom through that character. And I was like, oh, I feel like I could do that. Or like, I just wanted to be a part of like that hustle and bustle. And like, they talked up the importance of journalism, even as a student journalist. And so I thought, well, I have like a high school paper, like I could join. And then that just set me off on a really good direction.
I actually love that show too. I rewatch it all the time.
So I imagine that the first time you walked into your job, into the New York Times building, it's a pretty intimidating experience. So how have you dealt with sort of feelings of imposter syndrome or insecurity, being in such a highbrow, the top of the pyramid place?
Yeah, it was incredibly intimidating to be at the Times on day one, a place that I've watched like through documentaries, and I watched the Page One documentary, and I like idolize these reporters and I know their names. And to like walking into that building and feeling, wow, like this is like where you scan your badge, and like everyone I know like through television or through just like reading their articles, they scan their badges here too. And to just be in the ranks of them is an incredible honor. But yes, it does like bring up some, like it does like there are symptoms of imposter syndrome with that. Like, and I think in the beginning, I was incredibly quiet in certain meetings. Like I just really took the time to really observe what people's values are and trying to understand what would be additive to the conversations you have in meetings, especially since like, a meeting is like one conversation, but with many, many people. And it's hard to know like where you fit in that and what you can contribute. But I would say that first, like at least 6 months of the job, I kind of had like more of a backstage presence in like trying to understand like what is a good idea, what is a bad idea, what do people need, and kind of like taking stock of what people's needs are before you can understand how you can fill them. So that was kind of my tactic in like trying to like figure out what my role would be in that environment. And then slowly you kind of just build up credibility around that like, oh, you can do this and you can do that. I also think like understanding like your skills, I think it was great that I had a whole like 2.5 years at least at NPR and many years in student journalism to understand what my skills were before coming to the Times. And I think at that point, I had learned that I was really good at sourcing, finding people's stories, and finding characters whose lives kind of intersect with the breaking news moment or just like any kind of like news story. And like I just hit the phones and I feel confident in finding the person who's gonna be able to tell that story. And so I think that's how I thought of myself when I came to the Times and really tried to show people that I could do this. And the more I like proved that I could do it, the more credibility I like gained with the people in the room.
That's great. And you touched on some of the answers to the next question, but what would you recommend to a person, a young person who's just starting out and maybe they've just graduated from college and they want to get into journalism? What do you think is kind of your pearls of wisdom for someone like that? How do you get started?
Yeah, I think when I was an intern at NPR, one thing I really tried to do to like set myself apart, because you're kind of in the sea of interns who are competing for a job. And that's kind of like that with a lot of places. Like once you get your foot in the door as an intern, you're all competing to get hired for real. So I guess one thing that I had in my head, I thought, really helped was if somebody assigns me as no matter how small or big the task, to do it to 100% completion. And I think I saw people do it like 80% of the way or 90% of the way. But I think that last 10% is super critical in establishing trust with whoever's whoever is assigning you. I think the reality of like the difference between getting hired and not is like being well liked and being trusted with an assignment. And so I think like that just remembering to complete your tasks, no matter how big or small, will really help you gain that trust.
So after learning a bit about like your processes and what brought you to where you're at and working and a little background about that, I wanted to ask about how storytelling is, because obviously that's a big aspect of your job and your line of work. So what makes a great story? And if you could tell us about an experience that challenged you in the storytelling process and what made you really proud of it.
That's a great question. It took me a while to learn what a story is, even working in the realm of storytelling, because at NPR, a story would be 3 minutes. But at the Daily, a story would be 20 minutes, sometimes 40 minutes. And I think the difference between a 3-minute story and a 20-minute story is pretty vast. But I would say generally a story has a beginning, middle, and end. And the stories that we ran at NPR didn't really have those because it was usually like a Q&A for 3 minutes. But at the Daily, we really tried to start the story from the beginning and tell it, chronologically. I think when you go to the NewYorkTimes.com website, or if you pick up a newspaper and just look at the front page, a lot of the times those stories begin in the middle. There's a lot of beginnings to a story. It could be anything. It could be from like 1948 or or just like what happened over the weekend. And so you can pick what your beginning is, but you want to be strategic about, like, are you going to tell a long arc history? Then maybe you want to start all the way from the very beginning. Or do you want to tell just like the story of what happened this week? There's a lot of ways to tell a story, but I think the simplest way to distill it is to think about the beginning, middle, and end, and what kind of inflection points you want to include along the way.
We're going closer to the end, but I wanted to ask, so what are some of the biggest things you learned during your high school days and your college phase that you still use today in your line of work that you feel are very important?
Yeah. I think in high school, and in college, just having the space to play in a kind of semi-professional but professional context really helped me develop this like kind of creative instinct for storytelling. Like in high school and college, I would just encourage anyone who's interested who knows what they might want to do after college to just do it in school, in a setting where, like, you're kind of given a lump of clay and you're just like asked to do what you will with it. And sometimes it's really ugly and really bad. And but it's important to like make those mistakes. I mean, I go back to my old clips from high school and college and like, I cringe because I'm using language that I think is what I think an adult, like what I think a real journalist would use to like tell the story, and it doesn't make any sense. But I think it's important to like try out different voices, even though like you'll cringe at it, but or like just try out like what you think it means to be a journalist, or just like follow your curiosities. And a lot of this is like play and a lot of it is performance. But I think it's an important outlet to have before you're like in a professional setting, like telling, like, given the real responsibility of carrying out someone's story. So I would just encourage anybody who has any instinct for whatever they want to do, whether it's writing or journalism or business or, scientists, like to really play the part of like what they want to do.
I'm going to go to our final question.
Got it. Okay.
So we're going to always ask our guests this one final question. So if you could have a superpower related to your career, what would it be and how would it help you in your work?
Oh, that's easy. I would love a superpower where everything I read, I just remembered. I think I forget a lot of stories, and I get a lot of forget some facts. And if I just like knew everything I read, and like I never forgot it, I think it would really just like help with stories and like the stories I'm interested in, and like story ideation. Yeah, I'm trying to think how else that could help me, but I feel I just want to remember everything and retain everything I ever hear. But that's part of being human.
This was awesome. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much for your time. It was great talking to you and meeting you.
You have such a great story and so many good little tidbits for young people to take away.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.